Hello, my friends. This is Lynda Lippin, and welcome to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Hello, my friends. It's Lynda Lippin, your host of the Pilates Goddess podcast, and welcome back for yet another episode. And thank you, of course, as always, so much for coming back to listen to me. Now, if you're listening and you are a Pilates teacher, whether you are a brand new teacher or you've been teaching for quite a while, you may still be missing some support, some mentorship, some community, some place to get your questions answered, some place to get some continuing education. And I am thrilled to announce that I am offering a space for you. I am revamping and reopening Pilates Teacher Mastermind VIP starting March 1st, just in time for March Madness. In Pilates Teacher Mastermind VIP, we will be discussing all things teaching Pilates. We will go through anatomy. We will go through the Pilates system. You will get your questions answered. We will have classes. We will have workshops. We will have all kinds of fun and learning built into the program. And if you sign up now at pre-launch pricing, not only will you save a chunk of money, but you will gain immediate access to the 100 plus hours of recorded online workshops that I did for the first 2 years of my original Pilates Teacher Mastermind VIP program. In these workshops, you will learn everything from the full Pilates system with mat and all of the apparatus. You will also learn how to modify for back pain, for neck and shoulder pain, teaching prenatal, teaching postnatal, diastasis recti, hernia, osteoporosis, all the things. There's even 2 workshops in there that I did with neuroscientist and Pilates teacher Greg Udan, where we talk about motor learning principles for Pilates teachers and teaching Pilates to clients with neurological disorders. You got questions? I got answers. So I would love to see you over there in Pilates Teacher Mastermind VIP. Just head on over to PilatesTeacherMastermind.com or use the link in the show notes, and I will see you in Pilates Teacher Mastermind VIP. So I've seen a lot of questions online recently that have to do with how we move the spine and spine mechanics. So I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about this today and give you a good overview of spine mechanics in the perfect world, and then spine mechanics in how they work for most of our clients and most humans walking around. So if we start just by looking at the human spine, we have 24 vertebrae. 24. There's 7 at the top, and that is what we call C1, cervical 1 to C7. And C7 is, if you are sitting there listening to the podcast, and if you come back and you touch behind your skull, where it kind of divots in a little bit, that's going to be your C1. And then if you follow it all the way down to where the bone sticks out a little bit and your rib cage starts, that's C7. Below that, you have 12 thoracic vertebrae, T1 through T12. And interestingly enough, all of the thoracic vertebrae are attached to a rib, whether it is a fixed rib of the rib cage or the floating ribs down closer to your waist that have a little bit more movement. And then below the thoracic spine, we have the lumbar spine, L1 through L5. Now, there are arguments to be made that the sacrum, the big wide bone at the right below your lumbar spine, where your pelvis attaches on each side, and your coccyx could conceivably also be counted as vertebrae. But for ease of discussion and kind of simple talking about the spine, we will just use the 7 at the top, 12 at the middle, 5 at the bottom. Now, when you look at the vertebrae, what you will see is that the cervical vertebrae at the neck actually have the most movement, the most range of motion. They have a lot of movement going forward and backward, and flexion and extension, and a decent amount of movement and rotation going side to side and inside bending, bringing your ear towards your shoulder. This is partly because our eyes and our ears are in our heads, right? So we need to be able to move them. We need to be able to see behind us. We need to be able to look next to us. We need to be able to turn our heads. The thoracic spine, interestingly enough, has the most available rotation and already lives in a little bit of flexion. So I want to talk about this for a second, because we talk about lordosis and kyphosis in the spine. And lordosis and kyphosis are not, in fact, kind of bad words. They're not words that mean anything in terms of pathology. But lordosis is when the spine moves forward towards the front of your body, and kyphosis is when the spine moves backwards towards the back of your body. When we are born and we're not yet weight bearing, on our feet, our spines, like animals, are relatively straight. As we start to weight bear and walk on our feet, we start to develop the natural spinal curves that we see in kids and adults. And the way that works in terms of just balancing out weight bearing in the body is that the cervical and lumbar spines are a little bit lordotic. In other words, they curve forward. And the thoracic spine, and arguably your sacrum, are a little bit kyphotic and curve backward. This makes sense if you just think about our anatomy. We have a lot of our main living apparatus inside of that rib cage, inside of that thoracic spine. The thoracic spine needs to be able to move so that we can breathe. We have our heart, our lungs, things in there that really need to be protected. And of course, the rib cage needs to be able to move constantly so that we can breathe, because our diaphragm is attached under the rib cage and to the spine. The lower back, those 5 vertebrae, have a lot of movement. But once again, these are vertebrae that don't need to move that much. So this is really what I want to talk about today, is as you go up the spine, we go from more stable to more mobile. And this is not what you're going to see if you look at an anatomy textbook and look at movement of the spine. Okay? What you're going to see when you look at movement of the spine is you are going to see that there is more movement in flexion in the lower back than there is in the thoracic spine. And this is actually true, right? Because like I said, the thoracic spine is already a little round. The thoracic spine is already a little kyphotic. So when you go to round your spine, your thoracic spine has less has less to move, right? It doesn't have to go as far. And the lumbar spine does, and the lumbar spine can. But here's the rub. Here is the rub, my friends, is that when we use lumbar spine mobility to do the majority of our movement, and what I mean by that is we round our backs when we pick up heavy objects. Okay, we move our pelvises and move our lower backs when we move our legs. We move our lower backs when we move our shoulders. And think about that, because if you're tight up in the neck and shoulders, chances are you got way too much movement happening in your lower back. And when you start to look at the musculature around the spine, you see that the musculature around the lower back is very much there for stabilization. Okay. The lower back really needs to be able to stabilize, partly because our legs are directly attached to our lower backs via the iliopsoas. And if we are unable to properly stabilize our lumbar spines and our lower backs and our pelvises, then literally every time you move your leg, you're moving your lower back. Now, when you hear talk about picking up heavy objects with your legs and not your back, okay, when we hear talk about pelvic stability and spine stability and not overloading the lower back, that's what we're talking about. Okay. What we're talking about is the fact that we need to be doing most of our spinal movement above the lumbar spine. And does that mean that we never round and extend and do things with the lumbar spine? Absolutely not. But it does mean that that does not need to be the focus of attention as we are moving our bodies. So if you take an exercise like cat-cow or knee stretches on the reformer, and you look at the spine in that, and you take the spine into that C-curve, it can look, if you're just going by anatomy books, that most of that C-curve in Pilates or yoga should be coming from the lumbar spine. And that, my friends, is not correct. We tilt the pelvis under a little bit. We get a little bit of flexion through that lumbar spine, and then let most of that thoracic flexion, i.e. the spine flexion, come from the rib cage, from the thoracic spine, from the head dropping, from the length in the neck. This is one of those cases of just because we can doesn't mean we should. This also becomes very important for certain sports that involve rotation, particularly tennis and golf. Okay. In golf, you are putting tons and tons of pounds of torque into the spine, especially in the long game. It is crucially important that people have the ability to keep the pelvis neutral, keep the lumbar spine relatively steady, and get a lot of that rotation and torque from the thoracic vertebrae. Okay, so that the force is more evenly distributed through the body, the spine, and then ultimately more into the legs and the hips and less into the lower back. We live in a society where people are sitting a lot, where they're not moving a lot. And when they do move and they're feeling tight, they're usually feeling tight in their lower back or in their necks and shoulders. And so all they want to do is stretch those areas. But I'm letting you know right now that the best thing you can do for your body and for your clients is to focus on stabilizing that lower back, stabilizing that pelvis, getting some differentiated movement at the hip, differentiated movement at the shoulders, Okay. And then work again on mobility from the top to the bottom. So the mobility starts at the head and the neck and the shoulders, then works its way through that thoracic spine, and then can work its way through the lumbar spine as needed and as tolerated. Because frankly, if you're getting people coming into your classes and into your workshops who already have disc herniations, already have things going on in their backs, then these people don't need to be doing a whole lot of lumbar spine mobility work. Most humans do not need to be doing tons of lumbar spine mobility work. If you have anybody who's hypermobile, if you have anybody with any kind of sacroiliac instability, like me, we do not need to be doing tons of lumbar spine mobility. In fact, for me, especially, if I do lumbar spine mobility work, I tend to be in a lot of pain a few hours later. And you may notice that in some of your clients, that they do that mobility work with you and then they come back and they say that their backs actually hurt more later on or the next day. So I really, think about this, experiment with this. I'm adamant about this in the way that I teach. I'm adamant about this in the way that I coach the other Pilates teachers who I work with in Pilates Teacher Mastermind and, generally online in my free groups and in other people's groups where I might help answer questions. And I just really, really want you guys to focus on and understand that just because it says on paper that the lumbar spine is highly mobile doesn't mean in practice that we need to consistently focus on that lumbar spine mobility. In fact, it's the opposite. Because the lumbar spine is so mobile, we need to consistently focus on stabilizing it and stabilizing that area and doing very conscious mobility work in the lower back. Okay. And this is going to be especially important if we're looking at rotation, flexion, not so much extension and hyperextension, because again, the lumbar spine tends to be lordotic. It goes forward. So when you're doing extension, if you just keep focusing on the lift and extension coming through the lower back, through the neck, and then getting some length up through the breastbone and the rib cage, you are going to be fine, as are your clients. So that's it from me for today, my friends. I hope that you found this useful. And I hope that this discussion just gets you thinking and thinking about how you're working with your clients. If you have any questions for me, feel free to email me at Lynda@lyndalippin.com. And I will answer any questions that you have. You can also find me on Facebook. I have a free Pilates Teacher Mastermind group there as well. And I will see you soon. Have a good one. And as always, if you're enjoying the podcast, please go to the Apple Podcasts app, iTunes, Spotify, or my site on Podchaser and do leave a rating and, if you can, a written review. Talk soon. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Music brought to you by Nerd Salad. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, especially if you liked it. And please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks.